Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News, and I'm Faisal Rehman live from our Islamabad studios. Today, we'll be talking about a very important visit of the Taliban government. They are in Oslo, where human rights issues are being discussed. So the cases with women empowerment, but primarily the major issue that is currently about the law and order, security, and on top, humanitarian crisis. It's about the shortage of food, medical facilities, clean drinking water, and on top, just imagine negative 11 degrees centigrade temperature in Kabul. So that is exactly the problem. Almost 55% of the overall population of Afghanistan seems to be at a verge of, I would say, absolute disaster, because there isn't much food left. And now we've also learned that most likely the Indians will start sending that 50,000 tons of wheat shipment to Afghanistan from the start of the next month, that is February, still about 2 weeks away from now. But before we start talking about it and I introduce you to our panelists, our production team has prepared a report. Let's watch that.
First official interaction between Taliban and the Western representation since Taliban has seized power in Afghanistan is in progress as the 15 members Taliban delegation headed by Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi landed in Norway on 23 January 2022. This 3 days visit is dedicated to an official interaction of Taliban with Norwegian and European Union officials, representatives from the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, and the United States, as well as with civil society, including female leaders and journalists. The Taliban's delegation's first day of the 3 days visit was dedicated to the talks with female activists and journalists, among others. The next 2 days will be dedicated for the meetings with Western diplomats. According to the United States State Department, the United States delegation, led by Special Representative for Afghanistan Thomas West, plans to discuss the formation of a representative political system, responses to the urgent humanitarian and economic crisis, security and counter-terrorism concerns, and human rights, especially education for girls and women. Moreover, Norwegian Foreign Minister Anniken Huitfeldt stressed that the talks does not represent a legitimization or recognition of the Taliban. Moreover, she added that we must talk to the de facto authorities in the country and we cannot allow the political situation to lead to an even worse humanitarian disaster. Taliban spokesman Zabiullah Mujahid, in an interview with AFP on 22 January 2022, said that they hoped that the talks would help transform the atmosphere of war into a peaceful situation.
To talk about this, let me introduce you to our panelists. We have with us in our studio, on my right is Shahid Raza Saab. He's a geopolitical analyst.
Thank you.
So it's a pleasure to have you on
Absolutely.
the show, sir. Thank you. And we have with us Dr. Tughral Yamin Saab, who's a senior analyst. So pleasure to have you on the show. And from Germany, we have with us Harley Schlanger, and the political analyst, and also the representative of the Schiller Institute. Thank you so much for your time also. Pleasure to have you, sir, in the show. Now, Shahid Saab, since we were talking about the overall issues related to the Afghan problem. Currently, sir, the weather is extremely cold out there, extreme shortage of food. Generally, it is believed that around 50-55% of the population is at a verge of starvation. That's horrible. And then law and order issue, security problems, and again, the demands of the West about the women's rights. I fail to understand that if people are not alive, what about the human rights? Then that is the first and the foremost important aspect. Now, they're there in Norway, a very neutral country when it comes to it. I mean, they've been able to solve so many global issues. But sir, this time they also say that we are not going to accept the regime of the Taliban, but yes, we are there to, in fact, organize a framework how to go forward and how to help the masses. And primarily, if you do not recognize Taliban, forget about that. We are talking about the Afghan people. Now, sir, how effective do you think this particular visit would be? Because we haven't heard much about it. We were supposed to know that they were supposed to meet today, but we haven't heard much. But generally, these are the major areas that they in fact wanted to focus on.
Thank you, Faisal, first of all, for having me. I mean, let me just begin by saying that whatever is happening in Afghanistan at the moment, as Pakistanis, it is absolutely heartbreaking to watch millions of Afghans struggling and at the brink of starvation. We also saw an appeal from the Prime Minister of Pakistan, appealing to the international community to make a humanitarian intervention in the country and bring those supplies and unfreeze those assets so Afghanistan, the people of Afghanistan could function. Certainly the initiative which has been started by Norway, it might be a stepping stone towards finding a permanent solution to this problem. But given the urgency of the current situation, humanitarian situation in Afghanistan, where millions of Afghans are currently at the risk of starvation, and this is the 21st century, you would, not imagine that the international community could
Why
be so
to punish
apathetic.
them if you do not recognize the government?
And this is what the analysts have been saying, that this is actually a collective punishment tactic, and the American government is putting economic and humanitarian pressure on Afghanistan to seek some kind of a regime change, but it is highly unlikely to happen. But the international community really needs to step up and help the Afghan people in need, unfreeze their funds. Whether they immediately recognize the administration in Afghanistan or not is a political issue, but this is not a political issue. This is a purely humanitarian crisis that is unfolding in Afghanistan, and it is the responsibility of the international community to step up and provide the amount of aid which UN has recommended. I believe it's $4.4 billion.
Yeah. Annually they want that.
And annually to provide essential food and healthcare in the country. And I think the political issues could be postponed for a little bit, and I'm sure that international community can find a solution for the political setup that eventually will come to pass in Afghanistan. But currently, the priority for the international community, especially for Europe and America, who have been waging a war in Afghanistan for 20 years, most of their infrastructure has been destroyed. They do not have an agricultural base. They cannot actually support themselves. It is their responsibility by every stretch of the imagination.
When we talk about the capacity building, Shahid, I mean, 80% of the overall dependence was on the foreign aid.
Yeah.
They were never allowed to build that kind of. I think if the Americans would have spent at least 1% of what they claim they have in the right direction, things would have been a lot different.
Well, Afghanistan, the regime in Afghanistan, Western-backed regime in Afghanistan for the 20 years, it was created to fail. It was built to fail. It was built to remain dependent on the Western aid, because that's how they were designed. That was the purpose. So we find that Afghanistan is currently in a situation where millions of people are at the risk of starvation, and I think Pakistan is leading the efforts to bring this awareness to the international community, and it is up to the West and especially the American government to prioritize a humanitarian situation over their political gains.
All right. Now, as Tughral Saab, they say, where there is a will, there is a way. And definitely there is a way, but it seems that there is no will. Is it correct?
I think the will is there.
Will is there?
Absolutely. The world recognizes that Afghanistan is in a poor shape, in a very bad shape. Antonio Guterres has also said that don't punish the Afghans for the past follies of Taliban. People are aware that Afghans are suffering because of the 20-year occupation, in which nothing was done to help ameliorate this cause. The much touted female rights was also not really practiced. Maybe in the capital of Afghanistan they might have opened it up for the females, but not in the rural areas. So most of the Afghans were actually denied, or they were not made part of the system. They did not benefit from the so-called war economy. Whatever money was coming in, trillions of dollars went into the pockets of warlords and these people who took the money and
that money is unaccounted for, sir.
Fled to the Gulf, and there they are millionaires and billionaires and stuffs like that. So what's happening right now is a Western approach. America does not want to open up immediately to the Afghans. They realize the problem is there in Afghanistan, and if they let the wound fester, there would be more chaos. There could be, God forbid, another 9/11 type of thing. So this is a Western approach in which Norway has been asked to act as a conduit. The Afghan Taliban delegation has been invited to Norway in a Lear jet. Have you seen the pictures?
Yes.
It does not belong to them. They were invited there. And a report says that the Europeans think that they have got a $10 billion leverage with the Afghans. So that is the kind of money that they are willing to give to them. The Afghan delegation has been put up in a very swank Soria Moria hotel. So they are not taking them lightly. They want to help them. They want to create a mechanism whereby they can help them. They have their political agendas. They have their issues. They want, as they say, more female rights. They want an all-inclusive government. So they will push their agenda. There are no free lunches anywhere, neither in the West nor in the East. Occident and Orient, everybody has its political agendas. So this is the Western approach. They are approaching the Afghans. It has been 5 months that Taliban have been there. There is no visible resistance to them. People who could have resisted them have fled. The very little resistance that was put up in Panjshir Valley by Ahmad Shah Massoud's son dissipated very quickly. So they realize that there is no opposition. So they have to help these people. And the sooner they have influence with them, you can never have influence if you don't give money to anybody.
Is the West ready to accept them at some stage, sir?
They have already accepted it. See,
no, what I'm saying, their regime.
They have accepted. You see, inviting
but
them to
Norwegian authorities, they say that, well, this is not to accept their regime, we have not, but yet we have to talk to someone at least.
Faisal, this is only a matter of time. So you cannot accept them quickly. Maybe they take 6 months, maybe they take a year. First, they will pressurize them to accept some of their demands, which they may accept. You see, I've met Taliban, I've talked to them, and they say, we are not opposed to female education. The girls are not going to school, and in areas where the schools have been bombed, the boys are also not going to school. That's what they say. So they are not actually opposed to female education.
Not targeting a particular gender.
Yeah, they have their problems. They cannot just suddenly say, okay, we give you full liberty and dress up in Western dresses. They have to.
I think they've shown a lot of restraint, sir.
Absolutely, and they have to keep up appearances also. You see, they cannot all of a sudden say that we are open. This is an open society. So if they say that it is the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, they will try to behave as an Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. So I think this is a first gesture. I think there will be more recognition. They've already been going around. They've been to the Russians. They've been to the Chinese. They've been to Pakistan. Pakistan had organized a special OIC extraordinary conference for them. So they are getting their recognition.
But sir, we haven't heard much after that regarding the OIC's commitment.
But Pakistan and Saudi Arabia are willing to give money. At least 2 countries have pledged money. And I'm sure other countries will also pledge money. Turkey is
3 billion real.
Whatever, you don't even
That's
get.
That's what they committed.
You don't even get that. I'm talking about what we are getting from IMF. So for $1 billion, we have been going through so much of pain. You see, you have to accept all kinds of
political turmoil, I would say.
Yeah,
just for $1 billion.
For over $1 billion.
Look at the kind of pressure
and $1
the
billion
is
peanuts in today's world. It's not much of money. So recognition is coming.
Elon Musk made 36 billion in a day.
Absolutely. These people,
can you imagine?
Yeah, absolutely. He takes people into space to travel. So they will be adjusted. You see, the Afghan diplomat in Beijing, he's left because he's not getting any money.
Yes.
So if they leave their posts and they are supplanted by Taliban nominees, they will be accepted. It can't happen. You can't just. EU has now a physical presence in Kabul. They have finally opened up their office in Kabul because you just.
There's so many other United Nations.
United Nations organizations are there. So you cannot just take. UNAMA is still there. Their mission is officially there till March 22nd or 23rd. I don't know the exact date, but UNAMA is still there. So there are so many other UN agencies who are working there. You cannot leave a part of humanity in a limbo or in a void. So this is the first step to recognition. They will get some money. They will have to make some compromises. And this is the first step in their journey to become rehabilitated in the international community. That's how I look at it.
And you're absolutely right, when we say that it was an organized visit and none other by the Norwegian authorities. Absolutely. They arranged the chartered plane.
Absolutely.
And in fact, that 15-member delegation was very well looked after also.
Put them up in a very swank hotel.
I know, sir, because there is a park right in front of that and the hotel is on the other side. And a lot of people, I mean, that is the place where people protest also.
Yeah, they did
against,
protest
I was there about a year and a half ago, and the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, was there. So there was a lot of support for him. So everybody used to ask me that, where are you from? Are you from Palestine? I said, no, I'm not from Palestine, but I'm just here too because I was just passing by and I saw this man, and so why not to say hello to him and wave your hand, because that's a different world altogether. Now, Shahid Sahab, another very important area. We do talk about the overall arrangement that has been made. Do you believe that the Americans in particular, because sir, at the end of the day, they matter, and they matter the most. And European Union obviously is under a lot of influence of the US. Whether you talk about the Ukrainian issue earlier, the Britishers sent them the anti-tank missiles, and then we also learned that yesterday there was another, these anti-aircraft and anti-tank missiles were also sent by the Americans, and they were sent to Kiev. But I mean, this is the influence what I'm talking about. But sir, in this particular case, this is more about humanitarian issue now. It has become. Nothing is in favor of the people living out there. And so we are talking about almost 4 crore people, sir. That's, I mean, that's a big number. Half the population of Punjab almost. And more than 55%, as I earlier mentioned, are at the brink of starvation. Now, sir, aid can be started on ASAP basis. Just like there is an earthquake and you need to give relief and you need to rescue, and then the rest of these steps would come into play. Over here, sir, the Indians, they committed earlier, it's been 2 months almost, they haven't sent even a single grain. And now they say that, okay, by the first week of February, we'll be able to do so. And then the Afghan trucks would come in and take that grain back to Afghanistan. And, you know, let's see, 50,000 tons. It's just very, very little, I would say. But still, at least something is there. When it comes to Pakistan, so the president, the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, and I think everybody is on the same page, whether you talk about the opposition also, that we need to look after them because we have always looked after them. But sir, in this particular situation where our own economy, I mean, yes, we do claim that we are around 5.3% into growth as far as GDP is concerned, but still, sir, we do not have that kind of hard cash in our kitty to look after. I wish we had and we could have taken care of them. Islamic countries, 57, how many in fact agreed to it? It is right in front of you. But sir, under these circumstances, do you think this can go on? And well, if it can go on, for how long? Because the repercussions, that's not a joke, sir.
First of all, I think what's going on is that the Americans are driving a hard bargain. That's what they're doing. They're using a humanitarian situation to get political gains. I think the most important factor here from the American perspective is least to do with the, with the issue of human rights and female empowerment, but rather what way the Taliban administration will swing as far as China is concerned. Now that's a bit of a trump card. The Taliban can, in practical terms, become bona fide Chinese allies and benefit directly from the Chinese BRI vision for the Central and South Asian region. In return, they will receive investment in their mining sector, they will receive investment in resource sector, and obviously construction and humanitarian aid as well. So the Taliban have options. It is not that they have run out of options. If the Americans push it too far, that is exactly what's going to happen. The Taliban will shift properly towards China and they will become a bona fide Chinese ally. That will shift the balance of power in the Central Asian region because Afghanistan, I mean, why did the Americans invade Afghanistan in the first place? Because of its geography, right? So if Afghanistan shifts towards China and properly enters China's camp through BRI and other initiatives, that will be a strategic loss for the United States.
As mentioned by Tughral Saab, that the Chinese the Afghan ambassador stationed in Beijing had to come back because he wasn't paid even a single penny. I mean, there is a regular expense when you were running a system. So yeah, what sort of damage would that do between these two countries?
Look, I think I think the last resort option for Taliban here is to shift towards China and in a very proper fashion. And if they do, dynamics in Central Asia, because United States is very interested in maintaining presence in the Central and South Asian region for obvious reasons. They have an active China containment policy. Central and South Asian region is a pivotal region for that policy. So if they push it too far, the Taliban administration has this option that they can shift towards Russia-China camp of sorts. And obviously they have active support from Pakistan. Pakistan does not really have an option.
And it makes more logic also.
Yeah.
It suits them too.
And there's the role of India and Iran, which is not to be forgotten, because India is trying to recoup its, whatever influence it can recoup. It has lost significant financial resources in Afghanistan. It has lost the capability to blackmail Pakistan from the Western Front, open a two-front war scenario for Pakistan in a hybrid situation, which has been going on for 20 years. So they no longer are able to inflict that sort of damage on Pakistan, so they've lost a lot of leverage. So they're trying to recoup whatever influence they can in the Central Asian region. Anecdotal reference, they've invited the heads of state of 6 Central Asian countries to the military parade on the Republic Day 2 days from now. Let's see how that turns out. But in any case, I think
India, because I've also heard that they're going to do it at a much smaller scale because of COVID.
Yeah, but look,
but still, that impression needs to be there.
The impression needs to be there, but it's a typical Indian tactic, right? But if it works or it doesn't, remains to be seen. But for Pakistan, lastly, I think Pakistan does not have an option. We have to support the Afghan people come what may, because that's how the dynamics are. That's how our relationship is. It's rooted in history. It's rooted in 20 other things. And frankly speaking, it's in Pakistan's interest. It's not just because we want to help Afghanistan, it helps Pakistan as well, because Pakistan is emerging as a regional epicenter of trade and transit. We want to be connected to Central Asia.
There you go.
So there is an interest for us as well. It's not that, it's just, we're not just dumping money on Afghanistan. We should be helping.
It makes a lot of sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, this is your investment, basically.
Yeah, it is an investment.
Long-term investment.
As far as humanitarian aid is concerned, I think Pakistan should do whatever it can, but it is down. I think that Americans will eventually,
it's the kind of wait and see strategy I think they've
adopted. It is a wait and see strategy. They are applying the maximum pressure strategy on Afghanistan.
All right. Let's see what Mr. Harley has to share with us. Let's see what's brewing in the minds of the analysts stationed in Europe. Mr. Harley, your take on this particular visit of the 15-member delegation to Oslo. As we all know that they were invited by the Norwegian government. There are issues on both the sides, but at the end of the day, humanitarian crisis, extreme weather, shortage of food, clean drinking water, medical facilities, and so much more, sir, on top, law and order and security issue. It's now or never kind of a situation. Your take, sir.
Well, I agree with your last statement completely.
The humanitarian crisis is already there. It's already taking lives. And the U.S. policy is absolutely atrocious. It's a violation of human rights. It's probably a war crime by withholding the funds that belong to the Afghan people. Now, the visit to Norway is interesting because the situation between the U.S. and NATO is going to undergo a shift, I think, in the very near future, because we're seeing a shift away from the U.S. hard line against Russia in Ukraine, with the Germans saying they're not going to go along with this. We're seeing the French looking for an independent policy. The only ones going along with the U.S. for a hard line against the Russians are the former Russian states, the Eastern European states, and the British. So I think the situation in Europe is going to change. But in the meantime, the humanitarian crisis is already here. It's already taking lives, and this has to change. The fight in the United States is to get the American people to realize that the U.S. government is punishing the Afghan people for political opposition from the U.S. to the Taliban. I think the Taliban announcement today that they're going to reopen the schools for girls is really important. I think the Taliban can do more to help their cause. But the question is, will this get through to the American people? You know, we have a real top-down dictatorship on media in the United States, and people are not being informed about the situation in Afghanistan. My organization is doing all we can to make it aware, make Americans aware and Europeans aware of how acute this crisis actually is.
Now, another point, sir, since you mentioned that there is a dictatorship as far as media is concerned, and obviously media is very much in control. I have had a word with a couple of other analysts from France, from Sweden, and also with you, I remember, that there is a kind of a blackout as far as Afghanistan is concerned. There isn't any story that pops up on the screen regarding the real issues, the real problems. The only thing which we end up hearing is that the Taliban, all the negative propaganda about the Taliban. Do you think if there is a design to malign the Taliban regime, then nothing is going to happen? I mean, it's going to put them under more pressure. But the real issue of humanitarian crisis, that is not going to be sorted out, sir. What do you say?
Well, the children who are hungry, who are cold, who have no medicine, they're not enemies of the United States. There's no reason to punish them. In fact, I think the American people would probably embrace the idea of improving the lives of people in Afghanistan. But here we have in a sense, a coalition between the government run by war hawks and the media. And we see this anywhere in the world. Look, the Caesar sanctions against Syria are killing children. The continuing sanctions against Iraq, against Yemen, against Iran. This is the US policy towards anyone that doesn't go along with the US so-called rules-based order. So when we talked before, I told you that there had been no coverage of Afghanistan after the withdrawal. That's still the same. There's hardly a mention about the delegation of Taliban officials in Norway right now. I think the New York Times had a paragraph on it, but it's not visible. And as long as this is held outside of the vision of the American people, and they don't know what's going on, there's not going to be a change in the US. There are a handful of congressmen who are responding to David Beasley of the World Food Program and saying there should be more aid. The United States Agency for International Development just made another 300 million available, but that's peanuts.
Exactly.
They're holding $9+ billion of Afghan money in the Federal Reserve and in Western banks. That must be unfrozen immediately. That's not even a question of giving them some aid. That's a question of letting them have what is theirs.
Now, there was another news, sir, because as we all know that Norway seems to be a very, very neutral country. There were a lot of protesters, and most of these people are those who are anti-Taliban. And they gathered in the capital and they were chanting, slogans, and they were holding the placards and everything. And primarily, they were the people who, primarily just protested against the visit of the Taliban. And they said, well, let's not talk to them because they are not the true representatives of the Afghanistan in general, sir. So these protests also create a lot of negative impact, and those people, since they are living in Norway, and I think that is the country which has been maintaining the highest living standards for a very long time. I mean, those people living out there, they can't even compare what's going on in Kabul and rest of the cities and even in the villages where people are practically starving. So don't you think such negative propaganda should also be taken care of, sir?
Well, I don't know exactly who's involved in the demonstrations in Norway. You do have a very small, active group of right-wingers who are just anti-Muslim. But I don't know if that's who's doing these demonstrations or not. The biggest problem in Europe is that the European Union is totally focused on internal issues. And so you have inflation of utility prices, energy costs. You have breakdown of infrastructure. And now you have this fear campaign to convince Europeans that Russia is about to go to war in Ukraine. So the issue of children starving in Afghanistan is very far away from people in Europe. And that's a tragedy. Here we have the capacity to know in real time what's happening. and it's not getting out to the people who could do something about it. There are various aid groups that are calling for help, but on the whole, there's not many people listening because it's being blocked out of the major media. So all I can say is groups like my organization are doing everything we can to publicize the real situation in Afghanistan. We covered the OIC conference. We've been covering what Pakistan is trying to do. And our view is that if Russia, China, and the United States could get together through the extended troika, which includes Pakistan, you would have a basis for not just addressing the immediate humanitarian crisis, but the longer-term development of the country through the connection with the Belt and Road Initiative. And how does that hurt the United States if that's done? It doesn't hurt at all. In fact, it would be good for the United States. So it's largely a question of breaking the press blackout and getting the real story out. And that's what we're trying to do.
Now, Tughral Saab, another important factor, because I would agree with the gentleman in Germany, because, sir, let's suppose if this Ukrainian issue really ignites. I mean, they are at a verge of a war, sir. Hopefully nothing is going to happen. But the way the Britishers sent the anti-tank missile systems, sir, and then the Americans also supported them. And I'm talking about the tangible help, and that could lead to anything. You know, it is a matter of who fires the first bullet. So let's suppose if that starts in Ukraine, and that is going to be a huge European issue, then, sir, this issue, which is already at the back burner, nobody's going to talk about the Afghan issue, sir, because that was not going to be the priority anymore. It is already not in the media or in the news, in the papers, as such, sir.
Faisal Saab, people are interested in Afghanistan. America doesn't say it verbally. America is also deeply interested in Afghanistan. Russians are interested in Afghanistan. Russians just quelled a rebellion in Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is just next door to Afghanistan. It took them barely 2 weeks to send in their special troops under the within the umbrella of CSTO, and they just quelled the rebellion, sent them back, and they were not obliged to divert any troops from Ukraine. So Russia is interested. Russia wants peace and stability over here because they are worried about ISIS. They have talked about it several times. China is really worried. They had told the Taliban government, look, guys, we are going to support you. Just don't create trouble for us in Xinjiang. Very, very clear-cut message. They will give them money because China has big stakes in the mineral resources of Afghanistan. The copper mines, one of the best copper ore is found in the world in Anak in Afghanistan. And the Chinese were the first ones, the first overseas investment in any country was in Anak in Afghanistan in 2007. It's one of the largest copper deposits, and they've got a huge block over there. And I'm talking about the previous government, I'm not talking about Taliban, they're still there. China has interests, huge stakes. Iran also wants a stable Afghanistan. Iran does not want problems in Afghanistan because then you will have refugees going into Iran. Pakistan has problems because Pakistan fears that if there is starvation or deprivation or chaos in Afghanistan, there will be a fresh wave of Afghan refugees in Pakistan.
In fact, sir, our own foreign minister, in fact, mentioned before the OIC conference was held on the 18th and 19th of the December, if I'm not wrong, sir. And interestingly, 90,000 was the number he talked about. 90,000 more Afghan refugees have entered.
They have entered. I have credible information that there are Afghan refugees which are trickling in, despite the fact that we have erected a fence. So Afghan refugees, uncontrolled, unregulated Afghan refugees, is problematic for us because we are already groaning under the effects of a very large presence of Afghan refugees for decades now, and we don't have enough money to support them, feed them, put them to good use. So problems are there. Russia wants stability. Russia does not want IS to be active. Chinese do not want any problem in their restive province of Xinjiang. They also have economic interests there. Iranians do not want problems there. Pakistan does not want problem there. Whether the Americans like it or not, Afghanistan is an extension of Pakistan in many ways. Although Pakistan has no ulterior motives, but it is an extension of Pakistan because they're dependent on us, on their
almost everything.
Everything, medical aid, food, anything, you name it. Even they are coming to get visas in Pakistan. So Pakistan and Afghanistan are in many ways almost one block. You can call it AFPAC or whatever. So we have interest there. So everybody wants, so even if the Americans have their attention diverted towards Ukraine, they will not leave Afghanistan unattended. That is why the Norwegians have invited them, and Norwegians have a long history in peacemaking. And I think a very good point brought about by the German professor was that there is also a lot of anti-Muslim sentiment within Norway. You know that crackpot who killed a number of Muslims there. So despite that, they have invited these people who are fundamentalist Muslims.
The other day he was pleading for the bail.
Yeah, Breivik.
Breivik was the
one
name,
who
right?
killed
Most of his victims were Christians, by the way.
Because he entered into that
But there was another person.
Island, and then 170 people.
Yeah.
But there was another person who was involved in anti-Muslim hate also, who got killed later because of a truck
That's
accident.
a separate area, sir, where a lot of Syrians actually live, people from the Middle East. And there was some conflict regarding the mosque, and he was in fact having an argument about the noise pollution, because that's Norway, and one of the most liberal countries, so you can expect anything. So since I'm running out of time, but quick comment, sir. Now the latest figure, and that's United Nations, they say 95% of Afghans do not have enough to eat. 95% now. This is the latest figure, sir. A number of protests have taken place in Europe with critics claiming the Taliban should not be rewarded, rewarded with the meetings. I mean, on one side, it's the job of the United Nations, not those 200 odd protesters, basically, sir. But don't you think? I mean, this is a very fundamental question that even if they are willing, the kind of we don't see that kind of a momentum, unfortunately, sir.
Faisal, I think.
If they had the will, they would have sent the C-130s the way they always do. Loaded with wheat and other essential items, for that matter, sir.
Faisal, if we put it in a nutshell, because we are running out of time, everything that's happening in Afghanistan right now, 95% of Afghans not having enough food to eat in sub-zero temperatures. It is, if there's one country to blame, that's the United States. There is no other country who could burden more blame for what's happening in Afghanistan than the US. Because they are not only created a system which was fragile and not sustainable, did not create an economy, but also they are not acting. So they are also guilty of not acting in the face of a humanitarian disaster, which is in the making right now. And they are applying
Faisal,
this
could I
maximum
say
pressure
something?
strategy to extract political gains out of the Taliban, maybe even out of Pakistan, because as my colleague here explained, it has a multispectral effect. So I absolutely love and the fascinating input by Dr. Harley from Germany. It is a war crime.
It is a war.
It is a
Just
war
add
crime. And
something.
rightly mentioned by our friend in Germany. Yeah,
and the
it's a war crime.
blackout in the US media, about Afghanistan, a country they bombed for 20 years, is absolutely horrendous. It is absolutely pathetic what the American media is doing. They're totally guilty of not informing the American public of what's happening in Afghanistan because of that war, and because of the war that was fought before that war, which also had a significant American factor to it, right? So Afghanistan
Faisal,
has
can
been...
I just add one point?
Yeah, please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, the question was raised, who wants trouble in that region? I'll tell you who does. The British and the Americans, who tend to ally with the idea of the British Empire. They're terrified by the idea of a Eurasian integration centered around the China-Russia alliance, which would be beneficial to all the countries there, including Afghanistan and Pakistan. So there's a geopolitical intention in London and in Washington to sabotage any potential stability. for the same reason they went to war there in the first place. So this is an old British game plan from the Great Game and Mackinder's Geopolitics. And the tragedy of it is that I don't think the American people would support this, especially if they knew that the result is the likely deaths of millions of Afghans that supposedly we want to help.
Well, I can't agree more with you, sir, on this. And the interesting part is that if that is the case, then what about the rest of the world, sir? Are they subservient to the Britishers and the Americans?
Up to now, they have been. Look at the fact that the Europeans are quiet when the British and the US are arming Ukraine to provoke the Russians. So we have a moral indifference in the West. And I think Putin is right when he talks about the Western part of the world being post-Christian, that the idea of the importance of life is no longer accepted, at least by the people who are in the government and the financial institutions.
All right, sir. Thank you very much for your time, sir. It was a pleasure having you in the show, sir, Mr. Harley. Thank you so much, Tughral Saab. Thank you so much, Shahid Saab, for your presence as well. And that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you, inshallah, tomorrow at 8:05. Till then, you take good care. Khuda Hafiz.